Sweetie, we talked about this on Tuesday. It's too much to manage alone. I filled these forms out for you.
You just need to sign the asset transfer now.
Chloe, I remember Tuesday quite clearly. I was at the clinic.
My eyes were dilated for an exam. I couldn't read a text message that afternoon, let alone an entire real estate deed. So my question isn't about my memory. My question is, whose handwriting is on the baseline of this notary line?
Are you sure you remember correctly? It is a question designed to make you doubt your own eyes, your own mind, and your own history. Most people don't notice this, but predators rarely look like monsters. They usually look like the answer to your prayers. They rely on your politeness, and they count on your fear of appearing vulnerable. But Chloe made one critical error. She mistook Martha's quiet dignity for compliance. She didn't realize that while she was busy cleaning the house, Martha was busy studying the pattern. Martha had spent 32 years working as a senior auditor for the state county before her retirement. She understood how numbers behaved, but more importantly, she understood how people behaved when they thought nobody was watching. In her line of work, fraud rarely announced itself with a grand flourish. It crept in through tiny, permissible errors and casual omissions. It was the art of the slow leak. When her son married Chloe 3 years ago, Martha welcomed her warmly, offering the standard, supportive grace expected of a mother-in-law. But she didn't stop analyzing. 6 months ago, Chloe began volunteering to come over every Tuesday morning to help keep the large house clean. She insisted the sprawling colonial was too much for a woman living alone to manage. At first, it looked like pure devotion. Chloe would arrive early, bring fresh pastries, and insist that Martha sit down and relax. That's usually how psychological obligations are built. Manipulators rarely start with demands. They start with concessions. They use unprompted favors to create an invisible, unspoken debt, weaponizing kindness until it feels like an anchor. They do things you didn't ask them to do, so that later, when they ask for something you don't want to give, standing still feels harder than moving along. It is a calculated overperformance designed to make boundaries look like ingratitude. Chloe's movements around the living room were loud, punctuated by the aggressive hum of the vacuum and the deliberate clatter of moving furniture, a theatrical display of labor meant to be noticed and logged. Martha watched from the island, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of chamomile tea. She thanked her daughter-in-law with measured, predictable politeness, playing the part of the grateful, fatting matriarch to perfection. But beneath the calm exterior, the auditor's mind was running a quiet diagnostic. Chloe wasn't just cleaning. She was surveying the perimeter, cataloging the assets, and misreading Martha's silence as compliance. Martha stayed alert, waiting for the ledger to balance. The shift happened in tiny, polite increments, so subtle that anyone else would have mistaken them for genuine concern. It started during the 3rd month of the weekly cleanings. Chloe began dropping small, casual comments into the conversation while wiping down the counters, little fragments of manufactured worry designed to linger in the air like dust. Comments about Martha's son. "Mark is just so stressed with work, Martha. He loves you, but he admits it's getting hard for him to sleep knowing you're out here all by yourself. He feels like managing this property is draining what little time he has left for the kids." True isolation doesn't look like a lock on a door or bars on a window. It looks like someone quietly convincing you that your presence is an anchor dragging down the people you love. By framing herself as the only person who had the energy to show up, Chloe was trying to dismantle Martha's safety net from the inside out, making the outside world feel cold and her own family feel distant. It was emotional pressure wrapped in a thick blanket of synthetic sympathy. Every sigh from Chloe was a deliberate note in a quiet psychological symphony. The implication was clear. You are becoming an inconvenience. If Chloe could successfully fracture Martha's confidence in her son's devotion, she could step into the vacuum as the sole protector, the only advocate left. An auditor knows that the easiest way to falsify a record is to ensure there are no witnesses around to verify the truth. By cutting the emotional lines between mother and son, Chloe was preparing to audit the estate without interference. Martha felt the weight of the words, but she didn't flinch. She simply watched the shadow of her daughter-in-law stretch across the darkening kitchen floor, recognizing the play for exactly what it was, a hostile takeover disguised as a family intervention. An auditor's mind doesn't stop auditing just because the career has ended. For 30 years, Martha's world had been governed by a single, unshakable truth. Paper doesn't have a faulty memory, and ink doesn't lie to save face. She kept a meticulous daily journal, not out of paranoia, but out of a lifetime habit of documentation. Every appointment, every phone call, and every casual agreement was logged with a clean, fountain pen precision. 3 weeks ago, Chloe casually mentioned that during her previous visit, they had agreed Martha should move her primary retirement accounts to a joint management system for safety and convenience. When reality doesn't match someone's words, the human brain experiences a quiet friction. Most people ignore that friction because confronting it feels uncomfortable, or because they prefer a comforting lie to an ugly truth. But trusting that friction isn't paranoia, it's intelligence. Looking down at her own neat handwriting, Martha realized Chloe was fabricating agreements that never happened, testing the waters to see if the older woman's memory was beginning to slip. It was a classic gaslighting sequence, designed to make Martha doubt her own sanity. But Martha didn't confront her. She didn't call her son in a panic, nor did she change the locks. She understood that in a game of psychological chess, revealing your cards too early gives your opponent time to rewrite their strategy. Instead, she simply became still. During the subsequent Tuesday cleanings, Martha stopped offering conversational feedback. She withdrew into a quiet, observant passivity, playing the exact role Chloe expected of her, the docile, slightly confused elderly woman. From the shadows of her own home, Martha observed exactly what Chloe was tracking when she thought her mother-in-law was resting. She watched Chloe linger by the filing cabinet, noted the way her eyes scanned the mail on the counter, and logged every tiny infraction. Chloe thought she was successfully executing a quiet theft. In reality, she was just providing the auditor with fresh data. When a manipulator senses that their target is no longer reacting predictably, their strategy immediately changes. When passive warmth fails to yield compliance, they turn the defense into an attack. They don't abandon the script. They simply rewrite the narrative to make your defense look like a symptom of a disease. Chloe had noticed the heavy silence. She had felt the weight of Martha's unblinking, calm observations, and it made her uncomfortable. The predator realized the prey was watching back. "Martha, I noticed you've been double-checking the mail after I leave. Are you feeling all right lately? You know, you've asked me the same question about the water bill twice this week. Mark and I are getting a little worried about your focus." The ultimate psychological weapon against an independent woman of a certain age is making her doubt her own sanity. If a predator can convince you that your memory is fracturing, you will eventually hand over control of your life, your home, and your assets just to find relief from your own confusion. It is a cruel, calculated game of perception where your own mind is turned against you as a hostile witness. Chloe wasn't just lying. She was laying the groundwork for a medical narrative, something she could present to Mark later as proof that his mother was slipping away. But an auditor knows that when an opponent starts attacking the credibility of the data, it's because the data itself is damning. Martha didn't argue. She didn't offer a defense or show the journal that proved she hadn't mentioned the water bill even once. To argue with a gaslighter is to give them fresh material to twist. Instead, Martha simply nodded, kept her expression perfectly neutral, and let Chloe believe the arrow had hit its target. "Thank you for noticing, Chloe," Martha said, her voice steady and entirely devoid of fear. "I'll keep an eye on that." She let the silence stretch between them, watching Chloe's triumphant smile fade slightly around the edges, unsettled by a compliance that felt far too cold to be genuine. Power moves quietly, but malice moves with an even lighter step. The moment a manipulator believes their target is completely caught in the web, the performance becomes exhausting to maintain. Nobody can wear a mask forever. Eventually, the muscles tire, the smile slips, and the real face underneath demands to breathe. The performative sweetness drops away like discarded skin. The posture shifts instantly from a savior to a supervisor, and the true motive becomes visible in the dark. Chloe's efficiency was no longer cheerful. It was surgical. Her fingers flicked through the physical pages with the practiced speed of a corporate spy, her phone camera clicking silently in the dim room to digitize Martha's private accounts. Looking back, Martha realized the cleaning had never been about the house, the dust, or the sprawling colonial rooms. It was entirely about proximity. It was about creating an alibi of helpfulness to secure unfiltered access to the documents, the bank statements, the incoming mail, and the quiet spaces where a life savings could be slowly reassigned without triggering alarms. In the auditing world, this was known as an insider threat, the most dangerous kind of liability, because you invite them through the front door yourself. Martha stood frozen in the shadows, her breathing rhythmic and shallow. She didn't gasp, she didn't cry out, and she didn't let her emotions betray her position. Her hands simply rested flat against the wallpapered wall, steadying her momentum, absorbing the cold reality of the betrayal. To see the mask drop so completely was chilling, but for an auditor, it was also a moment of profound clarity. The ambiguity was gone. The speculation was over. The fraud was no longer an assumption. It was an active crime scene occurring right in her study. Martha watched the reflection intently, memorizing the exact angle of Chloe's phone and the specific folder in her hands, logging the final, indisputable entry into her mental ledger. Predators rely heavily on privacy to reshape the truth. They do their best work in isolated, one-on-one conversations where it is your word against theirs, or where they can play on your affection without any witnesses to log the interaction. They thrive in the gray areas of casual promises and unrecorded chats. To break that power, you must strip away the privacy and force them into an accountable, structured space. Martha didn't confront Chloe in the dark hallway while her phone camera clicked. Instead, she invited her into a brightly lit room where the rules of engagement were completely transparent, and the witnesses were legally bound to remember. "Oh, I didn't know we had company for brunch, Martha." "Sit down, Chloe. I thought it would be wonderful for us to sit as a family and look over those estate documents you've been working so hard on while cleaning my study." The shift in the room was instantaneous. By bringing David into the house, Martha hadn't just introduced an attorney, she had introduced an independent auditor to a closed deck of cards. Mark looked up, completely unaware of the undercurrents, but Chloe's posture stiffened. The trap she had spent 6 months carefully building had suddenly been turned inside out. She was no longer the benevolent caregiver managing a fatting matriarch. She was a suspect standing before a panel. Martha sat at the head of the table, her hands folded neatly over her napkin, completely calm. The numbers were on the table, the ledger was open, and for the first time, Chloe realized she was no longer the one controlling the audit. This was the moment the trap snapped shut. In the end, a corporate fraud or a domestic betrayal isn't exposed with raised voices, theatrical tears, or dramatic accusations. It is dismantled with cold, undeniable data. It is broken by the numbers that refuse to balance. "Martha, sweetie, we talked about this when I was dusting the study on Tuesday. You agreed it's just too much for you to manage alone anymore. I filled out the rest of the asset transfer forms for you. You just need to sign." Chloe, I remember Tuesday quite clearly, because on Tuesday I was at the clinic getting my eyes dilated for an exam. I couldn't read a text message that afternoon, let alone an entire real estate deed. So my question isn't about my memory. My question is, whose handwriting is on the baseline of this notary line? A guilty mind cannot tolerate sudden, absolute transparency. When a predator's manufactured narrative is completely shattered by an unshakable, documented fact, they lose the ability to calculate their next move. Their internal algorithm breaks down. They cannot pause to think or recalibrate, because silence in the face of proof is an admission of guilt. To survive, they must accelerate, scramble, or run. Martha watched the panic take root in her daughter-in-law's eyes. It was the exact same look she had seen on the faces of corrupt county officials decades ago, when she would quietly point to a misplaced decimal point that represented thousands of stolen dollars. Chloe's hands began to tremble against the edge of the table. The illusion of the doting caregiver had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the raw, exposed nerves of a thief caught red-handed in the light of day. "Mark, this is ridiculous. I was just trying to help. Your mother is getting things confused. You know how stressed we've been about her staying here, and I've been spending every Tuesday breaking my back cleaning this massive house for free. This is just a massive misunderstanding about the paperwork context." Over-explaining is its own kind of confession. In the field of forensic auditing, it is a well-documented behavioral pattern. The guilty always trade accuracy for volume. When a person is caught in a psychological misdirection, they lose the ability to give a direct answer to a direct question. They cannot explain the handwriting on the notary line, so instead, they try to change the subject entirely. They talk about their own effort, their personal sacrifices, the physical toll of their labor, and the unfairness of the perspective they are being viewed in. They attempt to build a dense wall of words to run away from a single, unshakable truth. Chloe's words cascaded through the room, a frantic torrent of defensive explanations that grew more desperate by the second. She was trying to rewrite herself as the victim of an ungrateful family, hoping that emotional noise could drown out the quiet power of physical evidence. But the room remained perfectly still. Martha didn't interrupt her. David didn't argue. The entire room simply watched her spin the story in real time, observing the frantic mechanics of her panic. The longer she spoke, the more transparent the deception became. Every frantic excuse was just another entry into Martha's mental ledger, a confirmation of the hostile intent that had walked through her front door every Tuesday morning. By attempting to salvage her narrative, Chloe was only completing the profile, providing the ultimate confirmation that the auditor's calculations had been flawless from the very beginning. Control rarely disappears with an explosion. It loosens first in small, quiet realizations: the sudden drop of a partner's gaze, the heavy silence of an attorney, the steady, unblinking eyes of an auditor who saw through the ledger all along, until there is absolutely nothing left to hold on to. The psychological architecture Chloe had spent half a year constructing hadn't just collapsed. It had vanished under the cold light of accountability. She had calculated every variable except the one that mattered most: the stubborn, unyielding nature of the truth. Chloe didn't finish her brunch. She didn't offer another frantic excuse, nor did she attempt to manufacture one last tearful plea for sympathy. The time for narrative manipulation had run out, and she knew it. Without a word, she turned and walked down the long hallway. Her footsteps, which had always been loud, performative, and energetic every Tuesday morning, were now heavy, rushed, and erratic. The front door opened, letting in a brief rush of the warm morning air, and then clicked shut behind her with a quiet, definitive finality that echoed through the colonial house. Mark stood up slowly, his face a mask of profound grief and disbelief, and followed her out into the driveway to face the wreckage of his marriage. The house settled into an intense, lingering stillness, the kind of absolute quiet that follows a storm. Martha sat at the head of the table, her hands resting calmly on the polished mahogany. For months her home had been a quiet battlefield, a space invaded by a smiling adversary who mistook kindness for vulnerability and age for incompetence. The threat was gone now, audited and expelled. She picked up her tea, the porcelain cup completely steady in her hand, and took a slow, quiet sip. The books were balanced, the inventory was secure, the ledger was finally closed. True security isn't about living in a flawless, utopian world where nobody ever tries to deceive you or rewrite your reality. That is an impossible standard. True security is about trusting your own eyes, your own records, and your own hard-earned intellect over someone else's loud, calculated performance. It is the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing that your mind is still a fortress, completely capable of defending its own perimeter. Martha didn't lose her peace that day. She hadn't spent the last 6 months living in a state of exhausting paranoia. She had simply spent them living in a state of immaculate clarity. She had protected her life, her home, and her family by refusing to let societal politeness or the fear of an uncomfortable confrontation override her baseline situational awareness. In a world that often pressures people, especially women of a certain age, to second-guess their instincts and capitulate for the sake of family harmony, Martha's silence hadn't been a sign of weakness. It had been an audit in progress. The daughter-in-law had looked at the silver hair and the quiet, solitary life, and assumed she found an easy target, a soft ledger waiting to be altered. She had completely misread the nature of Martha's grace. As the evening light settled completely over the colonial home, the quietness returned to its natural state. It was no longer the heavy, cautious silence of a house under siege, but the deep, restorative quiet of a sanctuary preserved. People would always try their luck with numbers and narratives, but Martha knew how to read the fine print. She took one final, slow sip of her tea, completely at peace in the stillness, knowing that as long as she trusted the data of her own life, she would never be lost in someone else's script. Sometimes, people don't lose control of their lives all at once. Sometimes they lose it one small, polite assumption at a time. If you or someone you care about has a gut feeling that something in a familiar relationship has shifted, don't wait until you're angry. Wait until you have the facts. If this story made you look at your own surroundings a little differently, subscribe and join us next week. Let's keep watching the patterns together.